Right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome members to the first hybrid meeting of the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership IJB Audit Committee, and remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. Some members have joined remotely, and could I remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking, and please raise your electronic hand should you wish to speak. Please do not speak during items unless I invite you to speak. For members, please raise your hand if you wish. Okay. Right. Have we got any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Chris Boyle today. Joining us.
Yep.
Apologies, my microphone went off. We also have joining us remotely, Elaine Henry will be joining the meeting soon. She's been delayed slightly. We've got Peter Drury. We've also got Mark Laird, Tony Gaskin, and Peter Drury. I think I've already said that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest and statements of transparency. Has anyone got any interest to declare? I take it that's a no. Okay, no interest. Item number 3, the minutes, including the action points. These have been circulated. So the previous minute of the meeting of the 7th of December, has anybody got, I'm not going to go through page by page, but has anybody got any issues with the content of that? Don't see anything. Okay, so we accept those. And the action points is item 3B. Can I invite Sandy to go through them?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm not going to go. Carol. Thank you. I'll not go through the action points in detail, but as a general point, we are making relatively good progress with the more recent actions, and we are gradually chipping away at some of the longer standing actions, but happy to take any specific questions that any of the committee members have on any of the audit outstanding points from the action points.
Nothing. Right, good. Fine, well, everybody's happy with that. Okay, item number 4, it's just a note here. The adults with incapacity internal audit. Members were asked to note that internal audit on adults with incapacity has been completed, which reviewed Angus Council's procedures to ensure compliance with the Office of the Public Guardian and the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland requirements in relation to recording guardianship for adults with incapacity. This report is due to be considered at Angus Council's Scrutiny and Audit Committee on the 25th of April 2023, which was yesterday, and an update will be brought in June 2023. So it's just a statement on that fact.
Chair,
yes.
I don't know if my mic's working. I can confirm that it was considered yesterday at scrutiny and audit. I can confirm that took place.
Thank you very much. Okay, now item 5, moving along. Sorry, excuse me while I scroll to the right place. Item 5 is a report of the internal audit plans for 2022 and to 23, a progress report on the 2022 plan. So it's a report by the Chief Internal Auditor, Tony Gaskin. So could I invite you, Tony, to say a few words on this report as a way of introduction?
Yes, it's a report spanning 3 years, in fact. So sorry, the slight echo. I'm hearing myself come back to me, and it's never a pleasant experience. So I think that the report covers 3 years, slightly oddly. So we're finishing off last year's plan. We have completion of this year's plan, and we've even got an early start on next year's plan, just because there were certain bits of advice that we needed to give that we didn't have the time for here. So in terms of last year's plan, we've finished everything off, and you'll see the primary care report later on in the agenda, and that's you've already seen that, of course, but now the action plan's complete and the report is complete, and we'll be following it up sooner rather than, in fact, we already have started following up on the Tayside system, and that will come to this meeting in June. So that's complete. In terms of the workforce and finance reports, workforce is currently being drafted. That's obviously a key report. And as you're aware, the two kind of biggest risks facing everyone at the moment are workforce and finance, and both are covered in these two reports. I actually have literally in front of me, I've literally just reviewed the finance report this morning, so I can assure you that will be out soon enough. And Judith has assured me that workforce is absolutely imminent. So you'll be getting both of those for June, and of course they'll be available, importantly, for the year-end governance statement. And of course by then you'll also have the other report that was referred to earlier, just in case there's anything in there that might make you think that there's anything that needs to be covered in the governance statement. So we're on track for producing next year's annual report. Well, it's a report for this year. It comes out in next year's plan. We'll have all the information, and we're on track. And we have just done a wee bit of work, which in some senses is slightly cheeky because we've used a bit of next year's plan before you formally approved it, but the work, the discussion needed to be done. So that will need to be homologated next time out when we bring the plan in June. But we're cracking on with everything, and we're on track, and I'm quite happy to answer any questions you may have. The other thing you'll see in the report, just briefly, is a summary of internal audit reports for the partners, and I'm quite happy to answer any questions on those. Remembering, of course, that the detail is for the parties. These are presented in order to inform your opinion of your own control environment. So quite properly, it's for the parties to think about the actions that are completed in relation to those findings. You're really getting those to say, are they significant enough? Are there any issues that you would need to consider as part of your kind of assessment of your control environment? Because obviously the two, three, I suppose, but your governance systems and those of the local authority and the health board are very closely linked. And in a sense, you enact your strategic decisions through the parties. And therefore, if they have issues, you have issues. And if things are going well there, then things are relatively okay for you. So that's the reason those are there. I'm happy to take any questions you may have, but there's nothing else I'd want to highlight out of that report.
Thank you very much, Tony. Yeah, it's good to see that the plan is so well underway now, and a lot of the activities completed or in progress. So that's good news. I don't really have much to add to what Tony was saying, except that it's looking good for another year of good audit work. We're only asked to. Okay, sorry. I've just been pointed out that Peter's got his hand up. So, Peter Drury, can I ask you to raise your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tony, for a good report and all the work you've done. My question was prompted by the red and amber ratings for workforce and finance, which I would think are two of our bigger issues. And I remember you saying, Tony, 1 or 2 years ago, that we should always concentrate on the higher risk issues. Do you think we've done that?
Yeah, so that's the rating there isn't about the assessment of the report. It's basically, bluntly speaking, we'd hope to have the first one out by December. So it's purely an assessment of are we on track to meet our original date? And you can see from that we're not. So that's what it's about. In some ways, possibly that's misleading. As auditors, we do tend to beat ourselves up a wee bit because the key risk is, are we going to have it for June? That's the big thing. But we didn't get it out when we said we would, so we've given ourselves a red cross and generally kind of self-flagellated. But in terms of the risk is, are we going to be there for June when you need to give an opinion? And we'll be there for sure. So, it's just basically an admission of failure to meet our own internal targets. That's all it is. It doesn't say what those audits are going to find, and I won't go into details, but I've seen one, and I would expect both of them, in truth, to be relatively positive compared to some situations we've seen elsewhere. So that's not an indication of what we found. It's just an indication of we haven't hit our own targets, and we're highlighting that because that's what auditors do.
Okay, has anybody else got, thanks for that, Tony. Has anybody else got any questions for Tony? I've got Sandy here.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not sure, Peter, in terms of the question you're asking, were you partly alluding to the risks that we face and perhaps them being the focus of audit activity?
Well, I was just wondering why things were going along slowly, but I'm satisfied with Tony's answer.
Okay, right. Okay, Tony's obviously dealt with that question. I'll just maybe go on to say, following this report, when we come to our next audit committee, we will receive the internal audit plan for the new year, and we'll be assessing that in conjunction with our internal auditors, and the content of that plan, particularly the discretionary or things that we choose to look at in terms of the internal audit, the risks that we face will be a large part of how we construct the content of that audit for the year to come. We've got on the year that we've just done, workforce and finance, and the year before, we saw things like commission services and primary care, which is actually on today's agenda. So they are covering quite a lot of our big risk areas. So when you see the audit plan for the year to come, it hopefully will cover some of the higher risk areas that we're looking at, just to make sure we've got internal audit coverage of those as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sandy. Anybody else got any questions on this item? If not, I'd like to move to the recommendation, which is we've been asked to note the completion of the 21-22 plan and also the work that's undertaken relating to the 22-23 and the 23-24 plans as well. Are we happy to approve that recommendation? No dissenters, right. Thank you. Item number 6 on the agenda, which is the internal audit report follow-up actions. I expect Sandy to give us an update on that one, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Again, yep, so one of our regular reports where we discuss the detailed and describe the detailed progress with individual actions that have come out of the aforementioned internal audits. Grateful to my colleague Riona Swankie, who's here with us today, who's helped compile this report. In terms of where we are, you'll all know that we've experienced, well, we've got behind, we've had a backlog of governance actions and internal audit follow-up issues that we've been trying to deal with. That backlog did essentially build up during the COVID period, although there were probably difficult issues that existed pre-COVID as well. We feel we are gradually being able to pick away at some of these issues and get some of the underlying audit queries and audit issues resolved. And hopefully we're starting to see that come through in some of these reports. One of the big audits that's referred to on here is the Commission Service Audit, which is one of our more recent audits. Now, there are actions for that one towards the end of the report, and the end of the tables are not complete yet, but we are making progress with them. And hopefully by the time we get to the next couple of audit committees, and will resolve themselves. As we complete things, so new actions will get added into this list that we're following up, and that will include actions from the primary care audit that we see later on today's agenda. We've made a recommendation about calling in some outstanding actions regarding information governance, not for the next meeting, but for the August meeting, if we haven't seen progress by that point. That's the main point. Again, happy to take any questions. Just to flag up, at the last meeting of this committee, we were asked to change the colour coding to bring it in line with other colour codings used elsewhere in the public sector. We've done that for the next report, the governance action plans. We're going to see how that runs, and then we'll eventually introduce it, if it's acceptable for everybody, to this report for our next meeting. But otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions from anybody.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you. Not sure if this is the right place to ask this, but on 2.4, charging for services, I wonder if it's possible that in future we could receive a report on applications for waivers and reductions in charges. That's where people may be aware, that's where following an assessment of charge for services, a service user can request that their charge be waived or reduced due to financial hardship. It would be nice to see in the future the actual numbers that apply for this ongoing. I know that we're actually looking at the moment, but for the future, it would be nice to see those figures, if this is the right place to ask that.
Thanks, George. Well, certainly it's an okay place to ask. There's no wrong place to ask these things. I'm not sure it's the right place for us to necessarily feedback on something that's operational like that, but absolutely, we've already been looking at that issue, and I think Eunice McLennan has been, he's given us an update about where she is with that, just on an informal update. Even within the last week, we've spoken about that. So it's definitely been looked at. And what we can look at is there a way we can share information about those questions you've asked, the number of applications, and the number of times, I'm guessing things like that have been agreed or accepted. So I don't think this would be the place to get that operational detail, but we'll look at another way of potentially sharing that information. Okay, thank you.
Catherine.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wondered whether or not there was any further information in relation to likely timescales around the hosting arrangements, outstanding action, and I note that there's been a further delay due to sick leave. So I'm just conscious that that's been overdue for a while, and wondering if there's any additional kind of support needed to get that over the line.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, this has been one of those issues that has been outstanding for a long time. And to be honest, I think it's something that probably predated COVID as well, because I think some of this came out of the Ministerial Steering Group in Strategic Steering Group in 2018, where we said we would make stepped improvements in that. We were looking at 3 domains of that, things like financial information sharing, planning and governance. There was a number of domains that we were looking at in terms of improving our information regarding hosted partner service. Has been affected by capacity issues all the way through, and latterly, there's been particular issues, particularly friends rather than the other partners. I'm just trying to see if we've put a specific update in here. What page is that on, Catherine?
It's on page 29, and it's the very top box, if that's helpful.
Oh, is that on the governance actions report?
Yes, sorry, have I skipped
Yeah,
ahead?
you have. But shall we deal with it anyway?
Apologies.
No, that's okay. I'll deal with the question anyway, because that's in the next report. Yeah, so we have got we have had basically a systematic problem with that. So one of the things I've mentioned about some of the audits, the audit action points have been difficult to follow up, are those where we're reliant on working with other parties to deal with that. Now, sometimes that's Angus Council, sometimes it's NHS Tayside. In this case in particular, it's all 3 partnerships. So what we'll do, Catherine, if it's okay, I'm not sure there's any specific things that we as a a committee can do in terms of supporting. But what we'll do is we'll put a more detail about where we are on those different domains in terms of, you know, governance sharing, financial information sharing, you know, clinical service sharing and things like that. And we'll get an updated position on that. We'll note your concerns. It's quite right to flag up, because this is a number of things that are, you know, we really should have made more progress on. And we'll try and get an update about that in the next version of that paper, which is our June committee. So we'll maybe try and put an appendix in there that's got a brief update. Would that be helpful?
Yes, thanks. And sorry for skipping to the next appendix.
Councillor Meehan.
In relation to care monitoring, again, I'll apologise if it should be out with this meeting, but I see that it notes as part of a framework agreement, they've consulted with providers in that, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, providers have their own care monitoring systems, and they will actually use them to monitor the work that they do. My question, or two questions. The first one is, do their care monitoring systems link with our care monitoring system, which I believe is now CM2000, is one. And the second one is that if companies bid for work via the IJB, could we make it a condition within a contract that they use CM2000?
Thanks, Councillor Meehan. That's a good question, and I'm realising now, as I thought might happen, the screen here I am using is way smaller than the one I ever use at home, and it's making it quite difficult. Right, so let me take those questions and break them down into a bit of detail. We currently use CM2000 or CM as our care management system. For a while, in let's say the last 3 or 4 years, we had urging providers to adopt that new systems. The provider information in our systems could interlink or interface seamlessly. That was something that we experienced some resistance from, and I think it's potentially justifiable resistance. We did support some providers to adopt care management systems, because some weren't using full systems, but we've supported them to adopt systems. And we've done that over the last 3 or 4 years. But a number of the providers that we're working with, of course, are working well beyond Angus. And many of the providers, particularly some of the bigger providers, were using systems, you know, either of their own or systems that we're using throughout, you know, elsewhere in the country. So as we've moved to our next contractual phase, we have changed that request from providers to move to using the same system as us, to a request, I think, to move to a system that can electronically interface with our system, so that we can take downloads of their activity, which would seamlessly go into our own systems. So that is the way we're now tackling this. So I could get you more operational detail on that one. We will follow that one up just to share the technicalities of that. But that's the change we've made. So we're not actively encouraging a move to the system we're using, but one that will properly interface with the system, so that we can have a more seamless exchange of electronic information. And I feel in 2023, that is a completely reasonable expectation of both ourselves to be able to facilitate that, but also of our providers to be able to share information on an electronic basis. But we can provide you with a short operational update on that separately, just to give you some more details on that. Okay.
Any other questions? No, I think we've given that one quite a good airing. Yeah, the list is quite big, but it's encouraging to see that there's progress being made, and we're in fact closing some of them off. So we'll just move on to the recommendations. There's 2 of them. One is to note the report and the progress made to date in terms of delivering the planned response. And secondly, to agree, if we can agree to call in a more detailed update regarding the response to 4622 Information Governance Strategy for the August 2020, for the August meeting, if matters haven't been resolved satisfactorily prior to that point. So are we in agreement with those recommendations? just saying, okay, right, everybody's happy with that one. We'll move on to item 7 on the agenda. Governance action plans, we've kind of touched on it a bit, but can you give us a more comprehensive update, please, Sandy?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick couple of comments on this one. So this one, we have changed the colour scheme, reflecting some of the conversations we had at the last audit committee. Hopefully that's a benefit to everybody. And, you know, assuming we don't have any negative feedback in the next 10 minutes, we will adopt that for the internal audit report, the one we've just seen a few minutes ago. Just to reference, we have commented on the action that's outstanding regarding governance documentation. We know we've got a series of governance documents that we need to improve, and we've put a effort into improving and updating our financial regulations over the last 2 or 3 months, which you'll see further down the agenda. So that's been one of the things that we've worked on over the last, well, since the last audit committee. There's also an item noted under 3.3, noting the update regarding large hospital set aside. I'm hopeful on the verge of making what might prove to be a step change in the way we deal with large hospital set aside with our NHS Tayside partners. It's not a rocket science solution, but it is something that I think is something that would be relatively simple for everybody to understand. And we're looking forward to seeing if we can move that towards full agreement and adopting over the year to come. It's not a rocket science solution, by the way, but it is something that's, I think, simple and pragmatic and will help us through the next few years. So that's my main comments on the paper. Again, thanks to Riona Swanky for pulling the paper together, but happy to take any questions.
Questions? Anyone? I've got some comments while people are thinking about questions. It's good to see that 2 of the items have now been completed. If the mysteries of large hospital set aside can be revealed to us after all those years, that would be very encouraging. And as I suspected, it's not as complex or as mysterious a concept as maybe some of us, I certainly thought. It's down to, so I'm looking forward to hearing the easy answer to how we're going to sort this long-running issue. Anybody got any questions on the governance report? Oh, Tony's got his hand up. Yeah, Tony?
Thanks, Chair. I think in terms of rocket science and large hospitals set aside, LHSA was always a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And certainly we had an audit recommendation some time ago that talked about exactly what Sandy is saying, pragmatic, sensible solutions that actually deliver for the people of Angus, rather than being bogged down in the technicalities. And there's something I always tell my staff, which is where, if you want to know where the weakness is in a piece of guidance, just look for where the Scottish Government say local determination. And you'll find that the large LHSA guidance is full of detail on things that don't need detail. And the really tricky issue of how you go through the technical accounting side. And I do feel for our poor Audit Scotland colleagues, external audit colleagues, who actually have to try and make sense of this stuff. But in terms of what we're trying to achieve, it's about making sure there's an arrangement that encourages everyone involved in the business of making health and the lives of people in Angus better. It makes, it's finding a solution that allows people, if they invest in a certain area, that they're not financially punished for that. And if they do good things and reduce attendance at A&E or anything else, that actually they see the benefit of that and that gets reinvested for the good of the people of Angus. So, and that's what it's about. And so you don't want technically complex solutions that are perhaps very great from a management accounting point of view. It's about coming to a pragmatic agreement. So that's certainly something we recommended some time ago. And if anything, the national guidance got in the way of that. And of course, it becomes difficult when you're in straitened financial circumstances, as we all are, because these questions are fun. When they're an abstract thing and you're sitting in St Andrew's House, that's one thing. When you're looking at some of the numbers that you as an IJB and your partners are dealing with in terms of financial pressures, So I think Sandy and his colleagues are to be commended in coming up with a solution, particularly at the moment. But we don't want rocket science. We want solutions that help. So I think it's yeah, don't look for rocket science because you don't want to.
Thank you for those observations, Tony, and I'm sure it's echoed by lots of people. Sandy, you want to follow up on that one?
Yeah, I think just on the back of that, I'm hopeful I haven't oversold the progress that we've made and the ideas we've got. There's obviously, I maybe shouldn't have said it out loud, but what I will do, just as part of developing this, I will share it with our internal and external auditors, because I know they've had interest. So the ideas I've been talking about are for a future year or for next year, or this year now onwards. They're not to do with the year just gone by, but I'll share it with our internal and external auditors just to get their takes on that. And we will eventually share it with the IJB board. And yes, we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Anybody got any further questions? We'll move on to the recommendations. Only one of them is just to note the report and the progress made to date in terms of delivering the planned response. Are we happy with that? Yes, thank you. Item number 8 on the agenda. It's the, get to the page. It's the 2022 to 23 external audit annual audit plan. Lots of audits there. Do you want to give
Thanks,
some
Chair.
introductions?
Yeah, so let me introduce this paper, and then I'll pass over to Mark, who can maybe talk about the plan in a bit more detail. And first of all, we probably should introduce Mark. Mark's just joined the team, and most of you all know from previous meetings, we have got a new audit team this year. And even within that new audit team, Mark has just joined that, I think probably in the last 4 weeks, Mark, or so, to replace somebody Claire, who was in the team, has moved on. So, thank you to Mark for stepping into that, and I look forward to working with you. What I would say about this report is, very briefly, we have, alongside the report, we've got a request to approve the audit fees. They're set out in this paper relatively clearly. The uplifts in here are in line with the general national picture for audit fees for IJBs, and I'm quite comfortable that we can accept those. Mark might want to just touch on the issue about timing. Mark and I have spoken about this, and we appreciate the operational issues that we all are still dealing with as we go through audit issues generally and concluding accounts. So, Mark, if I pass over to you, do you want to just talk us through the appendix?
Yes, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Chair. So this is our annual audit plan for the 22-23 audit year. It sets out a planned audit approach for the year, and again, hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the report itself. As you know, this is year 1 on a new round of 5-year audit appointment. So a new audit team is in place, as Sandy touched on, following handover from the previous Audit Scotland team. A bit of detail on that is included on page 3 of the appendix. Looking at the financial statements audit particularly, you'll see Appendix 1 on page 5. We set out our materiality levels for the year. As auditors, we can never give complete assurance over the figures in the financial statements, as our assurance is only based on the specific work that we carry out. We therefore assess risks of material misstatement and focus work in these areas particularly. That's not to say we don't look at material areas, but our aim is to give assurance to those charged with governance that the accounts are not materially misstated. Therefore, materiality is calculated to assess the impact of audit adjustments on the financial statements, and this has been set at 2% of gross expenditure for this year. This is a baseline for all our audits, and we'd only deviate from that where we see the audit as being a slightly more higher risk. So based on our knowledge of this audit and no history of significant errors, we don't see any reason to deviate for that for this year. Exhibit 2 sets out the significant risks of material misstatement identified from our planning work. The risk of material misstatement due to fraud caused by a management override of control is a standard risk that is present in all of our audit plans. It's required by ISO 240, which is an auditing standard, as explained in the table there. And the right-hand column outlines the audit procedures planned that we have to respond to this risk. And you'll see this is the only significant risk that we have identified. We've also identified other areas of specific audit focus, however, in relation to the COVID reserve balances that have to be returned to Scottish Government through the NHS board allocations, and specifically the accounting treatment of that. Also, the set aside in mental health services, those are estimates. So due to the estimate and judgment involved in that, we've also identified this as an area of focus. However, we don't deem these to be significant risks of material misstatement. Page 9 outlines the wider scope areas that we consider, and we'll carry out work in these areas as well throughout the year and report on these in our annual audit report. The two specific areas that we will look at almost all of our audits this year are climate change and cybersecurity. However, of course, for IJBs, we recognise that much of this will come from the information gathered in the audits of the partner bodies themselves. Exhibit 3 on page 11 outlines our planned output for the year and our target dates for delivering those. Members will note that we do plan to return to pre-COVID sign-off this year in terms of dates, and we currently have resources in place to deliver that, barring any unforeseen delays in the audit process itself. And Exhibit 4 gives a bit more detail on the timetable of that. Obviously, as Sandy said, we'll work together to get to as early a date as we possibly can on that. These are perhaps the latest dates we'd be looking at, other ones laid out in Exhibit 4. Information in relation to our arrangements for independence and for audit quality are set out on page 14, and a bit of background on our audit team itself is included at Appendix 1. This also confirms that the appointed auditor is Pauline Gillen, and she will sign the audit certificate in due course. That's all I plan to say on at this time, but again, happy to answer any questions that members have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome to the Audit Committee. Has anybody got any immediate questions for Mark? Peter, right. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. I had some questions about the audit fee and the 12.5% increase. And I'm afraid I do speak as an accountant, so I feel a bit bad about letting the side down. But can we understand why it needs to go up by so much? Because in the rest of the health and social care sector, there's severe pressure on wages and salaries going up by much less. So is it due to extra work, and how does that arise? Or is it due to a more generous salary situation in audit?
Yep, happy to come back on that. It certainly isn't due to a more generous salary in audit, that's for sure. However, yeah, there are a number of factors that really feed into that. You're correct in terms of work. We do have additional requirements this year around ISA 315 and changes there in relation to IT and so on. That's really it gives us quite a bit of additional work in terms of identifying systems, key systems, and the risks around those. I can provide a further breakdown if it would be helpful for members as to what the audit fee entails. We have, as you'll appreciate, we've had quite a lot of queries around this year, so we do have answers. If it would be helpful, I can provide that to the audit committee.
I would find that interesting. Yes, please.
No problem. I'll do that via Saturday if that's okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for your question. Thank you, Mark, for the explanation. Sandy's got... Did you? No. Oh, you're just waving your hand. Catherine, you've got a question.
Thank you. It was just in respect of recommendation. I just wondered if you give us an indication, or Mark indeed, what any supplementary fees might be incurred in relation to, and what sort of ballpark would be considered reasonable if we are to delegate authority for that spend. Thank you.
Mark, I'll answer that one first. Catherine, I suspect in my head, just as a start, we've never had to do this in previous years within the IJB. I suppose in my own head, I've always thought there might be two areas where there might be supplementary fees. One might be an area where we had potentially asked for a bit more advice from our auditors beyond what might be routinely expected, because we do occasionally ask questions of our auditors, funnily enough, but beyond that, something a bit more technical or whatever, or in depth. I suppose the second example would be if when the auditors are undertaking their audit, they find that there is workload beyond their original expectations, and they may find that it's beyond their original expectations and perhaps beyond what could be captured by the fee in the first place, in which case I would probably expect them to kind of come to us as they're getting into that and say, the breadth of what they're having to look at has gone beyond that. In terms of the reasonableness of any fee, clearly that would be based partly on the length of time and the quantity of additional input, but I guess it would be, in terms of how much per hour or day, it would be somehow linked to the existing standard fees that Mark has indirectly, I guess, referred to already. Okay, Mark, do you want to add anything further to that?
Thanks, Andy. Not a great deal, no. I think you've outlined it fairly well there. I suppose, just to give examples of perhaps where this may have occurred in the past, would be where we would find some kind of significant error in the financial statements, and that we would need to incur a substantial amount of additional testing that hadn't been foreseen in the audit planning stage. So any great change, I suppose, in our audit approach that may be required in response to any risks identified or errors identified in the financial statements. Again, as you've said, Sandy, it's never really happened before at the IJB here, certainly, or any IJB that I'm aware of, so it's very unlikely. So just to give members assurance there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions before we move on to the recommendations? Tony, put a hand up.
In terms of the debate, there's two things. One, if the externals do need to do extra work, then probably the audit fee is the least of your worries, because it means there's something quite substantial going on. And the other thing is, although we have this discussion and you're asked to approve it, it's all kind of a slightly polite fiction in the sense we don't actually get a great deal of choice. It's centrally imposed. So although you can have the discussion and ask questions, in the end, it's probably not a point that's worth a great deal of debate, because we can ask the questions, but in the end, it's kind of slightly imposed centrally in terms of the structure and everything else. But it's worth challenging, I think. But in the end, if there's any additional work, then it's based on a rate, but it's what it takes to sort out, and that really. But I've certainly, in my experience as well, I've never seen that happen. And 7 times 8, so that's 56 IJB years in my time.
Thank you for that observation again, Tony. You've still got your hand up. Is that a legacy, or you want another question?
Well, I meant to get it down and failed miserably.
Oh, okay. Right, I'll move. Oh, Catherine's got another question.
Thank you. Not so much a question, Chair, but just to come back to say I'm quite content with those responses, and I wouldn't have wanted to give the impression that I wasn't aware that we needed an auditor to undertake the work. I just wanted to be clear what it was we were delegating authority for. Thank you.
Yep, that's definitely reasonable. Okay, move on to the recommendations. There are 3 of them. One is to consider and note the attached external audit annual plan. Secondly, approve the proposed audit fee of $31,470 and devolve the authority for approval for any reasonable supplementary fees to the Chief Financial Officer, bearing in mind that Mark has offered to provide us a breakdown of that sum just for our information. And number 3 is notes the potential, potential uncertainty about the timing of the reporting arrangements. We've had experience of that, and the need for a possible additional or rearranged audit committee meeting to deal with the reviewing of the final accounts and external audit outputs, yes, we certainly will work together to optimise that our time together, obviously. So these three recommendations, given the airing we've had on the budget side of things, happy to accept those. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item, item 9, which is the actual completed audit. Yeah, completed external audit report for let me get this right, 21-22. Is that right? Sorry, I'm just scrolling to the... What?
Page 48. No.
No?
Thanks, man.
That's it. Sorry, yeah, just got a bit of mouse problems here. Thank you. Agenda item 9, 21-22 external audit report. We've seen this before in various guises, but here it is again as a final report. Does anybody want to say a few words, Sandy?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just give a brief commentary on this. So this is our final, hopefully final responses to outstanding actions regarding the 21-22 external audit. There were a limited range of actions. We provided an update, I think, in December to the IJB. The actions we didn't conclude were completed at the time. But in this update to today's meeting, we are suggesting that these are complete as far as we can reasonably take them. Some of them, while we described them as being complete, the underlying issues, for example, resolving financial sustainability, clearly have not magically resolved themselves. But we are continuing to do what we can through reports to the IJB, including this afternoon, to describe that situation and continue to set out a way of resolving those. And equally, the second point regarding workforce and succession, we have taken forward the action requested and have built that into our governance, but it doesn't solve the underlying issue. But again, happy to take any questions on these matters. Or equally happy to take any comments from Mark if Mark wants to comment on them as well.
It's like nobody's taking you up on that offer. Okay, we'll move on to...
I'm happy to chip in if you like, Sandy, just to give a bit of additional assurance. Again, yes, on financial sustainability, we're happy that the immediate actions are complete from our planning work this year. Obviously, as you said, it's an ongoing thing and a moving target, so we're content that the report's complete in this regard. We haven't raised either of these issues as significant risks in our 22-23 planning work or our plan, as you've seen. So we'll continue to consider financial sustainability, obviously, as part of the wider scope of our audit in 22-23. And again, we'll comment in our annual report at the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just move on to the recommendations. Basically, it is recommended that the Audit Committee considers and notes the external annual audit report action plan, and it's recommended that all these actions are now treated as being complete, given that explanation we've just had. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 10 on the agenda. Okay, this is the annual work plan for this committee for the year 23-24. And it's, do you want to give just a quick?
Yeah, very quickly. This is just for everybody's information. It kind of sets out our plan for the year to come, so everybody knows expectations in terms of ourselves, in terms of bringing reports to the committee, and for anybody else contributing to those reports, for example, internal and external auditors. I don't think there'll be any surprises here. We've bullet pointed in section 2 just things to note, 1 or 2 tweaks, 1 or 2 things we're just reinforcing or clarifying dates. But otherwise, I hope this is in line with people's expectations and people feel we can approve it.
Catherine?
Thank you. I just had one minor point really to make, which was reference to the external reports being shared through the Microsoft Teams channel. It was just to say that I've been unable to access those since there was a change to NHS Tayside's login in requirements. I don't know if other committee members and other members of that particular channel are also having those challenges, but it appears that it's beyond being resolved at the moment. So it's just for awareness that I'm not able to access it through that route.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. We'll follow that one up. I'm guessing you probably have followed it up already. Yeah, we'll have to follow that one up. And if it's not overcomable for people working in different places, for example, people logging in from an Angus Council perspective, or the likes of Haley and others like Haley logging in from external places, we'll have to just make sure we've got a way to work around that, which would be a backward step. But if that's what happens, that's what happens. So we'll have a look at that, and we can take an action to follow that one up. The sharing of relevant external reports has always been an important thing for us to make sure that information is being shared with all board members, when it's coming in from various third parties. So we'll follow that one up as an action point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, that's any other questions? This is a pretty straightforward paper. It's essentially just laying out what we're doing for the year, with the proviso that there might be an occasional additional meeting required, as we've described before. But this gives us a good idea of what's on the horizon, what's going to be presented at each meeting. So, given that quick overview, I'll now just move to the recommendations, just to accept it. I think I'm getting there. Yeah, approve the audit committee work plan. So, okay with that, everybody? Thank you. Right, moving on, because we've got a couple of hefty ones coming up. Right. Item number 11. It's the review of the role of the Chief Finance Officer, and it's for 22-23. Again, I guess this has got to be year one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And when I opened the audit papers the other day, I was thinking, how on earth were there 159 pages? Anyway, this is one of the reasons why there are 159 pages, because this one is 30-odd pages long itself. So this is something we agreed some time ago to do, which was an in-depth review of the SIPFA self-assessment of the role of the the role of the Chief Finance Officer. Obviously my role. What we agreed, and I think it's been really helpful, we agreed earlier on this financial year that we would do this review as an in-depth review, but do it with a independent party, and we agreed that that independent party would helpfully be our internal auditors. And I'm grateful for the input of Judith Treves and Tony's team, who has helped us do this self-assessment, actually to take almost the self-assessment out of it and just make it an assessment. Judith has done this in collaboration with ourselves. I think it gives a much more independent perspective on it. I'm not saying it's necessarily changed the outcome of the assessment, but it does feel much more as a much more reasonable way to put something in front of a committee, to have it not been done by almost like the incumbent in the role, but to do it with our auditors. So that has been really helpful. We've also, I think what we can generally say is that the IJB is generally compliant with most of the requirements set out here. There are one or two things where the role of a Chief Finance Officer inside an integrated joint partnership is not as wide as it might be in somewhere like a health board or a local authority, because we're not providing all the systems and we're not doing one or two other things such as overseeing the capital programs. But where we are doing things, I think we're generally compliant. And there have been changes over the recent years in terms of things like line management, staff management and staff supervision. We know there are a few kind of things we do need to improve on, and the one or two things jotted down in here. I think things like training is something that I'm not saying we took our eye off the ball, but like everybody else, we had to reprioritise over the last 2 or 3 years. And we've recognised that as some of the work we're doing, and we know it, and we've set that out here. So happy to take any questions. We've set out in the recommendations that we expect to do in future a more in-depth review every 2 years, and that in future, when that in-depth review is done, it would be best being undertaken in conjunction with an independent party, which I suppose I would feel would be ideally done with internal audit in future. But otherwise, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, it's not really a question there, Chair. It's more a point. I absolutely agree, Sandy. I think this does bring more value to the overall review process. I'm much more comfortable with this process.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the recommendations. It's a pretty self-evident report. It kind of affirms what we already know, that the kind of post is well covered, but given those caveats that Gail's just mentioned, it's good to have a kind of independent assessment, thorough assessment of these roles from someone else. Okay, so into the recommendations, the 4 of them. One is to note the content of the self-assessment of the role. I won't read every word, but I'll get the meaning of it. And to include the important points highlighted in the report. Number 2 notes that the IJB is generally compliant with the principles set out in the review. That seems kind of severely understated, but I'm sure it is the right language to use. And 3 notes that this self-assessment has been compiled following full review and validation by our internal, the IJB's internal auditors. And finally, that agrees that an in-depth review of this role of Chief Finance Office carried out every 2 years going forward, and these should include an element of independent involvement in any assessment. Quite a comprehensive set of recommendations, but we'll have those. Yep.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Yeah. What's that you do? You learn something every day. Sorry, I've just been getting some tuition on how to use the word. Right, item number 12. It's on our agenda, second last one. We're getting there. It's an update to the financial regulations, which clearly is the realm of the Chief Finance Officer, and I know that hasn't been looked at or updated for about 8 years now. So, over to you, Sandy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yep, you're right. It hasn't been updated for 8 years. In fact, it hasn't been updated since it was written, and it was written so it was in place when the IJB came into formation in spring 2016. So this was written in 2015-16. We've had it on our to-do list for quite some time to review these financial regulations and update them. This is that update. We've set out the kind of main types of update that have come in here under section 3. And I suppose I kind of view this as a kind of a spring clean, a refresh. There's not much fundamental that we've done in here. It's taken out things like duplication, it's modernised terminology, and it's brought it in line with phraseology from the most recent update of the integration scheme. What I'm hopeful is that from here on, we can update these financial regulations more frequently. I suggest that happens maybe in 2 years' time. And I suppose I would expect future reviews will clearly no longer have to deal with the language updating, which we're getting out of the way this time, but we'll probably deal with more subtle changes to financial regulations as required. I think that's really the main kind of content and the body of the change. Happy to obviously take on those. We're bringing these here to the Audit Committee formally the approval of changes to our financial regulations at the moment, as we speak this morning, rests with the IJB itself rather than the Audit Committee. The original regulations in 2015-16 were signed off by I think it's called the Shadow IJB, the body that existed before the IJB formally started. But actually, at this afternoon's main IJB committee, I do ask in one of the finance reports for the sign-off of changes to the financial regulations to be devolved to this committee. Because I think that this committee probably has a bit more time to review these things, and it feels a bit more appropriate. And the request to the IJB this afternoon requests for that devolved authority to approve changes to be backdated to this morning. So that would remove the need for future rubber stamping by the IJB, which we'd otherwise have to do. But anyway, that's by the by, really just asking everybody here to have a review of these. But obviously, in terms of the here and now, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to deal with those.
I found the document very useful, actually. It's kind of gives a good overview of how the budget controls and flows go backwards and forwards, and it's answered a few questions I had in the past. It's quite a useful document, and yet, given your recommendation about devolving the updating to this committee, it's totally consistent with the fact we're kind of looking at all the financial things anyway, so the financial regulations are equally something that we could do and approve. Has anybody got any? Oh, we've got two hands. I don't know who was first. I think. Yeah, you just beat Catherine.
Thank you. It's, budget adjustments in year 6.7. It talks about budget adjustments up to and including 500,000. Has that changed, or is that the same figure as was previous?
That's not changed.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, speak just a second. Okay. I'll see if that can be emerged, but it's I'm pretty sure we haven't changed that.
Okay.
No, it's not changed.
Oh yes, yes.
Thank you.
It's the track change version. It's not changed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It was just in relation to the engagement with Angus Council and NHS Tayside counterparts. There's reference to that, to them being cited on the review. I just wondered if you confirm that they've seen the proposals and lent their support in general terms to the changes that have been made. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I can confirm that they've been these updated documents have been shared with the Directors of Finance of both parties. I appreciate they're both busy. They're relatively long documents for somebody to review in detail, but I have made them aware of the changes we're doing. I did get some specific feedback from the Director of Finance of Angus Council, and I have responded to that, and we've reflected that. He was happy with what we were doing. I didn't get any specific feedback from NHS Tayside, but yeah, I've done this during a busy period, and in terms of their priorities, I can understand that may have only had limited time to review these things, but we did get some feedback, and we responded to that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Can I just make one more comment, please? Yeah, one more comment. I should have highlighted as we were talking about this. We did also share this with Tony Gaskin's team as we were putting this work together. So again, much the same as Catherine's question in terms of sharing it. We've got bullet points down here of things that we have done on the way. I think we're probably the first IJB in Tayside to do a more current update of this. So we are going to share this with other IJBs locally. And I suppose when we come down to refining things again, would probably do another round of kind of probably maybe a bit consultation about things next time we look at this in 2025. Again, see if there's things that we can learn from our neighbouring IJBs.
Thank you, Sandy. And also thanks for sharing the tracked change version as well, because it shows us that it's essentially a clean-up and a more in-depth review will be forthcoming. So I'd like to move to the recommendations. Okay, there's two of them. It's requiring us to consider the updated financial regulations and approve them for submission to the IJB, as previously mentioned, and note that the financial regulations will be reviewed by April 2025. You happy with that? Thank you.
Agreed.
Let's move on to item 13. I don't know if we've lost Tony or if he's left the meeting.
No,
Oh,
I'm
he's-
here. I was
yeah,
just
you're-
coughing and
sorry,
decided large screen coughing
You're just
wasn't
an
the way forward.
avatar. Okay, thank you. Right, sorry, I've not got my prompt. What did I? Lovely. Yeah, we learn something every day. Okay, item number 13. This is the final item apart from the date next meeting, and it's a big one. It's the internal audit report on the sustainability of primary care, which is one of our follow-up actions, AN 0522, which has been addressed a couple of times before, but this is a more up-to-date version of it. So is it Sandy or Tony that's speaking to this?
I'll briefly introduce this, and then Gail certainly and maybe Tony might want to comment on this. So just to remind everybody, we saw a draft of this report at our December audit committee. I think we agreed at the time that we would circulate the completed version. I think we did that maybe in January or February. The management responses to this report were agreed in January. So this is us formally sharing this report, and obviously gives this committee a chance to comment on it. It's important to remember that this internal audit report, is relatively unusual in that it is a joint internal audit that's been done with NHS Tayside and I think it was Berwick and Ross, IJB. You obviously a lot of recommendations and quite detailed, and I'm just going to pass over to Gail, who might want to just pick up a few things in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Before I steal Tony's thunder there, I can provide an update assurance on this report. We provide assurance to the NHS Tayside Care Governance Committee, and that was done on the 23rd of February and on the 6th of April again, where we report on the progress. Like Sandy, I'm going to be positive about the report before Tony comes in here, because I think that we've done and made considerable progress, and that is evident and underway with the work that we're doing. I'd particularly like to draw attention to the GP Sustainability Survey, where 61 general practices in Tayside have responded to that survey. We're also making significant progress in relation to IT provisions in general practice, and we have an agreed working group and work plan at the moment with the property department. However, there are away to be changes within that property department, so I'm not quite sure how that will progress. The Primary Care Board were due to have a second wider workshop, a risk workshop. That was proposed for the 8th of March. That was postponed because we have a new primary care manager in post, and we agreed that we needed a smaller working group to develop the terms of reference for the Primary Care Board and draft the reporting structure for that primary care risk a bit further. So that workshop was postponed because of that. Premises, as I said, I'll leave it as we've said, Tony, but there is a working group there. A couple of other outstanding actions are sitting with myself, Tony, around the primary care strategy, where we do have a draft in development, and the revision of the Associate Medical Director's job description, which again, I've got a draft that we're busy pulling together at the moment. I don't know if I've missed anything.
Thank you, Gail. Tony, you want to follow up?
I would just say that we were this has been an exceptionally complex report as I went into last time, and I don't propose to take you through the whole of the detail again because that happened before. So we were very pleased at the thoughtfulness of the responses from Gail and that were agreed with the colleagues. In terms of the follow-up, I think that can come back as a formal report later, and I wouldn't want to get into that now. I think at the time, and certainly in a number of fora, and you'll probably gather from Gail's kind of slightly wry smile when we talk about property, that is a fundamental constituent, and it's one that in other areas we have raised as a concern, not just for this report, but for others. So there is an issue there. And I think that's the one that's out of my hands, out of Gail's hands, but is a concern. I think overall, in terms of the progress, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some delays there because it is incredibly complex. It's all about negotiation. It's about working together. It's about changing circumstances. But we were very pleased with the response. We will await the follow-up with interest and a certain degree of acceptance that some of those things are going to take longer than others. And as long as we keep pushing and we keep making sure that we do give this impetus and that we do work together, that's the main thing. So in terms of this report, it's an unusual one. Quite often you have we're going to do this, and you either did it or you do it or you don't. This one is going to be more complex. It's more wide ranging. You have to work with partners. There's no point Angus going it alone. We don't want a beggar my neighbour policy. The IJBs have to work together, have to work with the health board because everyone's got a stake in this. So it's going to be complicated. It's going to be difficult. It's one of the most complex risks you can imagine. Even defining the risk is difficult. But we are comfortable with progress to date. We're very comfortable with the responses we got. And I think that's the key message, is we are doing what we can to mitigate what is an incredibly complex, fast-moving, but really important risk in terms of certainly healthcare provision. So that's all I'd really want to say on the matter. And I think I'd like to thank Gail for what was an enormous it was a nasty audit report to land on anyone's desk in terms of producing a response. So I would like to thank Gail for her work on that. And we just need to keep an eye on it because it's an issue that no matter how much we try and mitigate it, you are not going to mitigate that risk down particularly far in the current circumstances. And it's a case of making sure we're doing the absolute best that we can.
Thank you for that overview and encouraging words, I think. I guess this is not a unique to Angus issue. This is a Tayside-wide, nationwide, probably worldwide issue. But needless to say, we've got to solve our own issues and work with partners. So it is complex, and the range of items that need to be monitored are enormous, and it will be. I had one question. We're expecting a set of responses in June that we were expecting in March. What will these be? Just plans on how we're going to address the issue, or will there be any significant progress made in June?
I don't know if you can all hear me. I can provide a progress update, Chair, if that would suffice. Or Tony, we can do that. We can use some of the information around the progress yet.
Has anybody got any specific questions? Catherine?
Thank you. This is a very helpful and important report. I mean, obviously, primary care is one of the fundamental building blocks of good health and social care provision in any area. So it's right and proper that we've had a really good look at what's in place and what the risks are. I think there were some really, really good suggestions in the report in terms of how our approach across Tayside could be strengthened and further developed. And when I was looking at that, I was just wondering to myself, do we have the capacity that we need and the right capacity to support Gail and colleagues to deliver on what is a really, really significant strategic area of business for Angus and for Tayside more generally. So that was my question really, is do we have the right capacity? How do we support Gail and colleagues to get the capacity that's needed to make a real difference here?
This keeps going off for me, sorry. That's currently been raised by the interim chair of NHS Tayside Board as well. We do have a new primary care manager in the service who also manages our 2C practices, who's working on that. The biggest challenge is going to be around some of the three priorities. And in the main, I think, as Tony and I have both alluded to, is around premises. I think that's going to be one of the areas of challenge, Catherine, and how much progress we can make around that. We do seem to be making progress with other areas. We never have enough capacity in the team, I think, to devote to this. But the primary care board, we've got good buy-in. We do have buy-in from Dundee, albeit they didn't commission part of the report. They are very much bought into this. So we do have a Tayside-wide involvement, and I am inundated to thank them for their support. They do very well, but I do think we've a couple of gaps, Catherine, that we could always do with additional help. Tony, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as well.
I mean, you could always do with additional support. I think a lot of this report that was about making sure everyone's swimming in the same direction, because there was an awful lot of fingers in the pie at the beginning. Well, actually, I'm not going to take that metaphor anyway, but there was an awful lot of people involved, and it wasn't necessarily coordinated, and there was good practice that wasn't necessarily being shared. And I think that this idea of having a group that coordinates responses across Tayside is important. I think, as Gail and I both alluded to, we have concerns around premises. There's no two ways about that. It's something that we have raised. And to a certain extent, I suppose, the follow-up reports, in terms of the reports you get from NHS Tayside that are relevant, we've done an awful lot of follow-up work on estates, which is pertinent to this. And it may be that the next one will bring an excerpt of that here because it is relevant. And there have been a number of comments we've made within NHS Tayside about the estates department and the extent to which, across a range of areas, not least of which is primary care, their contribution could be better. So I think that is a particular area. Otherwise, you could always do with more hands on deck. But on the other hand, if you got all the hands pulling the same rope at the same time and trying to achieve the same things, that's the biggest issue. And I think that's the biggest thing that could come out of this report. So I think there's two different answers. There's probably enough to do the things we need to do and be getting on with, certainly to make a significant improvement. The caveat to that is the premises side, where I wouldn't have the same level of confidence as I would under the areas that Gail is directly pulling the strings, if you like. And that would be my honest answer on that. And we'll probably try and bring something to the next report in terms of our progress report and our comments on the other areas, which include estates as an enabling function, that we might just bring something on that might provide a bit more information there.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, it's a positive note is we've got a work plan here and it's well characterised. We know what we've got to do to support a kind of fundamental building block of health and social care, like Catherine has said. The good news is that we've got most of the issues on a plan, and before we didn't have it categorised. We did, well, we did, but not to the granularity that it really needs. So that's the good news. Now, be very interested to follow this progress of all these action items. Some will be easier, some will be harder, but at least we'll have something to look at and something to follow and something to monitor. So has anybody got any other questions before I move on to the recommendations? No, thank you. The recommendations are straightforward. The first one is notes the finalisation of the sustainability of primary care internal audit report, and two, notes that the actions associated with the audit will be reported through future editions of the internal audit follow-up report, which is already quite filled up with follow-up actions. There's some more to be getting on with, but are we happy with those recommendations? Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, that brings us, I think, to the penultimate, oh no, the last one, which is, right, it's the date of the next meeting. The next hybrid meeting of the Angus Health and Social Care Integration Joint, well, what a mouthful. Our audit committee will be held on Wednesday, the 21st of June at 11:30 here in the Town and County Hall, Forfar. Hopefully we'll get, there have been some breaks in transmission from the people that have been reporting from externally, from dialing in. So we'll hopefully look into that. But we've missed, not too much to lose the content, but we've missed the odd sentence or two. Maybe a gem in there somewhere that isn't coming through. But we'll look into that, see what the problem was. But thanks everybody for attending, and thanks for your patience and forbearance at this first hybrid meeting of this committee. So hopefully the next ones will run just, if not more smoothly than this one. So thank you very much, everybody.
John, can you stop the live stream, please? Thank you.